Windows G.
Yes.
Well, that's part of the class,
The problem
isn't it?
is, I started at 4 this morning. I finished at 5 minutes till 7, so we left at 7. And my brain
Herbert,
is
you
not
remember that.
working.
Windows G.
Let me write that
That's
down.
gonna be on the test.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, well, some of this is going on YouTube. Okay, now, you had a question.
Yes. So far, I've got the understanding the process, but I get to a word like by, which is dia. It
Yes.
shows up in 573 verses, 70 times in Romans, and it can mean dia, can mean lots of stuff. So, do I have to go through all 70 verses of?
Now, dia is, let me see, where is that word?
Verse
12:23.
5, the very first word.
In verse 5, yes, here you go. This is dia, it's a primary preposition. And prepositions are everywhere, so you don't need to go through all those.
Okay.
The issue is that as a preposition, it can mean through, and it can mean on account of or because of, and the context tells you which is which. So, for example, by whom we have received, well, that means he's the instrument of our, so it would be through whom.
And the same with the resurrection up above there, back one, by the resurrection.
Oh, by, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, this is a different word. This is ek.
Yeah.
If you want to write on your tablet, through is going through something. By is coming out of, ek is coming out of the middle. Ace is going into, when we say believe into Jesus, that's from the outside going in. Just draw you a circle and draw a line all the way through it and put dia, or through. dia, that's that preposition. That means that you're going from here through this to there. The next one is that ek, that is the spirit of holiness by the resurrection. That means out from within. So you start your line inside the circle and go out, and that's ek. Or X, as it says there. Okay, there's another one. It's ace, E-I-S. Let's see.
I saw it somewhere.
Yeah. Right there. G1519. It's for obedience to the faith. Ace means from the outside in. So when it means for, it means unto. You're going here. From here, you're going to here.
Is that the E-L?
It's E-I-S.
E-I-S.
Yeah.
E-I-S.
Yes, it's G1519.
And how's it translated?
Ace. Well, it's translated all these different ways. You see how many ways it's translated?
About, against,
The
among.
basic idea is, though, into, including the point reached or entered. It's the idea of coming from the outside into something. So, for example, there's no obedience to the faith except by this apostleship, but the apostleship will drive it to this, to obedience. So it's unto obedience, from the outside going in. There's another one, pros, P-R-O-S, which means alongside of. So on the outside of the circle, you just draw a line up and down. That's just the side.
What about among?
What's it called?
Pros, P-R-O-S.
I'm sorry. E-N.
En is in, it's inside the circle. It doesn't have any travel, it's just there. It's a dot inside. Okay, On top of the circle, if you have a line that's going across the top, that's upon, it's epi. And that just means it's on top of it. It's resting around. And then under it, with a line underneath the circle, is hupa. It means under. It's U-P-O. It's actually pronounced hupa because it's got a rough breathing sound, which makes an H sound, but it's spelled U-P-O, or Upsilon P. Let's see, what else is there? Alongside, on top, underneath, into, out of. I think that's got most of them. We'll come to some more probably. You have this among.
Yes.
That's the in, that's within, that's inside, so it's among it. It's
Depending on the context of the subject, it's.
whatever the
Okay.
issue is. For example, in this case, it's nations. The nations are the circle,
Mhm.
and it's inside here. It's among them.
Okay.
Is there a summary in the Word that tells you how many times Ian was translated as among, and how many times it was translated as something else? Because Bible Hub has that, and to me that's helpful, but.
It's translated, see all these translated words here on the NASB usage?
Oh, yeah,
If you go down here to among, it's only translated among 4 times.
Yeah, so that's the number after there, okay.
Yeah.
That's the way it's written.
Among over here is 124 times.
Right, that's the one.
But among with the asterisk, and the asterisk means it's abbreviated. I guess that's what that is.
But
No,
that's not limited to Romans, that's.
Oh, no, that's all, that's a whole.
So you wouldn't be able to, if Paul used the word 70 times in Romans.
The context is going to tell you what
Right,
it is.
okay.
As long as you have this general picture of this circle, and you put in is inside, pros is alongside, epi's on top, hupas on out from the inside is ek, into from outside is ace. As long as you keep that circle in mind, these prepositions, once you get the basic idea of the preposition, then you can look at the context and it'll tell you what's going on there. See this according up here? That's kata. That's another one. According. I don't know. Kata means there's a standard that you're putting something up against, according to the standard of, but it doesn't fit this circle picture that I had to draw. So that's
It's
just
kind of like a plumb line measure
It's the
comparison.
Okay, does that help? That just confuses the.
No, it's good.
Okay.
The circle thing helped me a lot.
Okay, now, you had another issue about locating something.
Oh, yeah, I was saying that, and I didn't know if this would be something to cover in here, but I'm looking at that screen on my computer, and I want to come over here and write a bunch of notes on my notebook. And then when I go back, that screen is a bunch of words, and I don't have a reference point, and I pick up the wrong behold or among or words.
Well, I'd suggest that before you start your notes, write the English word and the Greek number.
Do that.
So when you go back to the thing, you should just look for that Greek word or.
Well, mine, if I right click, mine will highlight it. That word?
Right. If we right click Jesus.
No, the word Jesus, not the Greek word.
Okay. Yeah. When you
Or click on it and scroll across it, it'll.
Yes, if you want to highlight, see that highlighted the whole verse.
Right.
But if you just want to highlight one word, you just take your, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, but I'm using that cursor to get the Strong's number to open the doodad over here.
Yeah, but if you, I think it'll stay highlighted if you left click to but right before the word and drag across it, the
Well, I
English
tried that,
word,
but something's going wrong with mine.
the English word will,
When I put my thing here to click on it.
yeah, it's
See
gonna
what it
select
does?
that verse, but you can still highlight it, I think.
Oh, okay. You're right. Okay.
And then
You can
you
do
can,
that.
and I think mine stays highlighted, cause
It
matter of fact, even
Until-
when you change verses, it'll still be highlighted until you open and close
Well,
the
that-
page.
Well, if you get over here though, if it's highlighted, you get over here and click on it, it should
Yeah,
go.
okay.
Just get off of
But
that.
that'll
word.
mark your place.
Yeah.
You can highlight that and then just move over
I
here.
don't, you might can use a color with it too,
Yeah, you
to
probably
highlight it with
You
yellow or
have
something.
color options. Oh, where is that color option thing?
There was, it's not a problem all over the place, but there was in this particular segment somewhere, there was a word that showed up, maybe in the Holy Scriptures or something,
Here? In the Holy Scriptures?
and then down below it says, so according to, it might have been a different translation too, but
See, there's another preposition. This is
Sorry.
Perry. Kata means according to the standard. Perry means concerning the issue. Perry actually means to encircle it. But I don't know how that illustration works with the idea of concerning, except that I guess Perry is drawing the circle. So you're concerning this. So it's
Like
into-
determining what the subject is. Yeah.
And that's what the gospel is. It's concerning the Son. I'm not sure that I'm tracking with you though on what the problem is. Let's say we want to make some notes about apostle. So what do? You click on that, left click it.
and then I left click it and get all of the occurrences over here.
Oh, find, yeah.
Yeah, and
And so in Romans,
then I
it's
go to
used
Romans.
3 times,
Yeah.
just here.
And then by the time I look at, they might, 3's not many, but by the time I look at 5 or 7,
Yeah.
and then I go back over there, I pick up the wrong apostle. But it has to be a phrase or a word that shows up multiple times. If it's there, that's not a problem, but down later, it was, and, it was an issue. 'Cause-
Well, are you clicking on each one of these then?
Yeah,
Okay, so you're changing your.
right, I changed it,
here.
yeah,
So,
and then I gotta go back to the original screen.
and to do that, you just go back to the first one and click on it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Have we solved your problem?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if I can highlight it and go back to it, that does it.
See, I don't even know, I guess this automatically highlighted this when I told it to look for the number.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mine,
You have these,
mine doesn't do that.
See, that's what I was talking about. Mine still,
see,
Okay.
it's highlighting it as soon as you select that number and you use content. This is the latest edition, and you should have gotten that when you downloaded it. So they ought to be working right. But you have this on file over here. You have this whole preference thing that you can
Yeah.
set up all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
General clipboard text on the whole 9 yards. So it's a very complex program, but my reason for pulling it into our studies is simply because you have to be able to find where these words are, and that's what the numbers do for us.
Right.
And all the rest of this stuff is extra benefit if you know how to use it, but I don't even know how to use some of this stuff, so. And the reason is because I don't bother to learn stuff that I don't feel like I need to learn, simply because I'm only looking for the number of times it's used and where, and so I can, the goal of this number business is simply to get a feel in your own understanding, a feel for the meaning of the word. And you can only do that by seeing it in various sentences and contexts. So that's the only reason that, that we need these words. Because like we saw last time, or time before last, when we clicked on this servant thing, and we went to Romans 6. That's where we got the basic idea, at least it popped into my head, that we got the basic idea of somebody who's under another person's decision-making authority. That's what a servant is, somebody who's under somebody else's decision-making authority. And that means you don't get to make the decision, you have to do what your deciders tell you. That's what being a servant is, or a slave. And when we talked about the difference between whether you're a willing servant or a compelled servant, that's beside the point. You have to do what your decider's saying. And that's the difference between translating it as slave or a bondservant. Because in the Old Testament, the bondservant was a willing slave, whereas other people were compelled slaves. But that's not the issue in terms of being a slave. The issue is you don't get a call of shots.
See, and that's different than how we use the word today in the church. You know, humble servant is more of a volunteer to do Sunday school or whatever.
Yes, you know, and basically you get to start calling the shots. Wherever you are. But in the bigger picture, we're servants of Jesus. So when we volunteer to be a servant to the church, we're supposed to still be under his agenda. So we're really not getting any perks in terms of calling the shots, but even the elders in the church have to decide. They have to make the decisions, but we're supposed to be praying about what the Lord would have us to do so that he's involved in guiding our decision making. But that's what Paul is doing here in verse 1 is telling us point blankly that he is not the one who dreamed this stuff up. He is a servant of Jesus the Christ, of the Savior King. And that is, as we said last time, that is the most fundamental, critical issue for all of humanity, because we were all created by him, we belong to him whether we like it or not, and we're subject to his decisions whether we like them or not. And the fact is, every one of us would, if we were the ones who were calling the shots, would have already messed the plan up big time, because what we like is what we choose instead of what's best. So that's just human nature. Okay, any more? I don't want us to get so deep in the weeds that we just throw up our hands and say this is impossible. Because it's not. It's just a learning curve.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's, I thought you meant, yeah, it is a learning curve. I was just a little slow on the outtake here. That's why I focused just on the fact that we're using this program, because this will tell us, the numbers will tell us where the words are, how many times they're used. We can go there, read it, see it in its context, and develop a feel for that word. So that, for example, those of you who've been listening to me now for a year and a half know that I use the word agape in reference to a value system, operating according to a value system. But within that concept is, well, what are the top priorities in your value system? That's agape. I'm using it in a different way than most people use the word love. They just say, when a person says, I love ice cream, in a sense, they're reflecting their value system, but in a more primary sense, they're just telling you they like to eat that stuff. And it's a part of the value system, but it's not, you don't think value system with our LOVE word in English. You have to, and the reason I'm doing that is because over all these years that I've been studying with this, I've gone over agape in lots of places, and my gut feeling for that word is he's talking about the value system and things that are important to you. And really that's what love means. It's important to you. It doesn't say how important, because that's the sliding scale in the system. Okay?
And what it does for me is the main thing is to understand what this author means with that word.
Exactly, and that's the critical thing, because long time ago,
what he's trying to say.
In our secular culture, especially in the upper levels of education, the universities and colleges and stuff, in literature, it came to be the issue is, what does this mean to you? Well, it doesn't mean anything to you until you know what it means to the author.
Right.
But if you divorce the author from it, you can read those words and say, well, that means this to me, and it may not mean that at all. It just means that to you, and that means your way.
That's right.
You know, and so finding out what it meant to the author, fundamentally, this is the Spirit of God's authorship, but it's also through a man, and so he used Paul with his personality and temperament and all that kind of stuff. So when he uses John, he may sponsor the same word, but John's perception of that's a little different than Paul's, perhaps, maybe not, but you'll see that as you go through the various uses. Okay?
And that's different things to different people on both ends.
Yes.
Different people understand what Paul wrote or relate better to Paul's writing than John's, or vice versa. And that's the way God compensated for the whole thing.
Well, you take the four Gospels. That's four different men's perspective of the same person, Jesus. And this is where our Revelation studies are starting to get into this with the man and the calf and the lion and the eagle and that kind of stuff. We'll be talking more about that this evening. But that just means that for Matthew, Jesus was a person who was focused on the righteousness issue of being the king, the one who's going to rule in righteousness. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Well, Mark's view of Jesus isn't focused on the righteousness of the king. It's focused on the power of the king in terms of the fears that I have. So he didn't give me a spirit of fear. He gave me the spirit of Jesus, who's the sovereign overseer of all of that stuff. So I got nothing to be afraid of. Well, Luke's whole focus as a physician and the way he writes his is Jesus was a man, perfect man. He was the second Adam. That's what Paul called him in 1 Corinthians 15. And Luke was, in John, Jesus is the eagle of heaven. He's the boss. He's the creator, and he's the one who is, he's soaring high above all the rest. But the main issue of being an eagle is the destroyer of death. So, this is just reality. We all see things a little differently, and most of it are issues of how we are relating to the truth given our particular strengths and weaknesses. So it does. And that's where a lot of the conflict arises in the interpretation of Scripture, because we can't seem to get away from how this makes me feel when I find out that Paul thought this about that, because I'm going to be inclined to interpret it in the way it suits my feelings rather than what suited his text. Mm-hmm. And that's dangerous, but it's
why a lot of these churches, so-called churches, are in the shape they're in, or are going where they're going. Exactly. Let me say it that way.
Yeah, and they even preach. They call it preaching to felt needs. Why don't you just preach the Bible? You'll reach all the needs that way, right. Sooner or later. All right. What did you discover about this called thing? When we looked at called, it's used in 4 places in Romans as, if you remember that ACV thing up there, when it said called, this said it was an adjective. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not the verb and it's not the noun, so it's not the root word. When we talk about somebody who's called, we have to understand the meaning in terms of the noun and the verb before the adjectives will make any sense to us. So when we look at Romans 1:1 and it says he was, see, even the translators in the King James, they call that a verb. They say it's called to be an apostle. Well, that's a mistranslation, because called isn't a verb. So it can't be called to be. It has to be a called apostle. Well, what does that mean? Well, in 1:6, it says, you are also the called. Well, let's go down to 6 and see what that is. Is it an adjective too? There it is. To the called. Yeah, This is an adjective too. So this is giving us the adjectives. It's only used in 2 more places. One of them's in the very next verse. 7. Where is the 7? I'm missing the number. There's 8. Gotta be before that. To all those who are the called of Jesus Christ, to all those being in Rome, beloved of God, called here in verse 7. Yeah, there's the 7, I finally saw it. And then in 8:28, it's also an adjective. So this is actually this number, 28:22, G 28:22, that's called when it's an adjective. But what is it whenever it's a verb? That's what we need. That's the next thing we need to find out. It says in Romans 1 that he was called. So it should tell us right here where it came from. It's from 2564. Okay? So if we go up here and type 2564, G 2564.
What's the G?
Greek, because it's going to be H in the Old Testament.
Okay.
Okay, if I type that number
He answered
in
that
there.
quick, didn't he?
What?
I said he answered that quick.
Well,
He knew that one.
G and H, it's that. But see, here is the verb. Let's see, Paul uses this verb way more often. He used the adjective 4 times, he used the verb 7 times. But that's, let's look at Romans 4:17 for a minute. Just so we'll get a feel for this word. 4:17, okay, where's the, as it is written, or it stands written, that I have made you a father of many nations before whom he made. He calls the things, where is that? Nations according to which was spoken. Where is the word?
Further down, I guess.
That's 19.
I seen
Two
the word
verses
call,
back.
it was right in the bottom right-hand corner. When you-
17.
There it is.
That's it,
Here it
the
is,
bottom
Who
right.
right
calls?
there. Who calls?
That's a verb.
Where are we here? I need to get up.
See, that's the trouble I have.
Okay,
There you
who
go.
calls the things that are not existing as existing. That's the key idea of Abraham's faith. God calls things that don't presently exist as if they already exist. That's that whole concept of omniscience and predestination and election, not a bunch of things. But the point is, this is your verb. It says right there, it's a verb. Well, in order to understand that verb so that we can understand the adjective, we have to look at it in these places. And this issue here, it means that he is telling us things that don't exist are going to exist. That's the idea of calling it as if. Let's go to 8:30.
Right in the middle.
Yes, right here.
Well, twice.
This
right
is
below-
also,
right below it too.
yes, and it's the same word. So this is one of those places where it says that Paul used it in, is it 7? 7 texts, but he's actually used it more than 7 times. All right, so here it says, these also he called. Now he's talking about these predestined people. And he's saying that it's these that are predestined that he's called, and the ones that he has called, these he's made righteous, and those whom he's made righteous, he's also glorified. Well, the glorified thing is one of those cases where he's calling things that are not as though they were, because we're not glorified yet.
Right.
We we are glorified saints in the technical sense. So the issue here of calling is coming out to be something like, it's not the same as declaring, but it's close to that idea that he is summoning. And I guess that's the basic idea of calling, is that he summoned you, and he summoned us as believers into two levels of reality. One is the present one, and one's the one he's already got in store for us. So that he's summoning us into whatever he's talking about. And then that summons into that is going to mean that he's also summoning us into something else. So I guess the basic idea is just to summon. So let's see if that'll fit these other texts. If he, verse 9, or chapter 9, verse 7.
Will be called.
Yes. Isaac, the seed, shall be called. In other words, Isaac is going to be the one who is different from Ishmael, because Isaac is the one that God summoned. Ishmael, he just dismissed. He told Abram, that boy was your doing with a woman that you should not have been doing it with. And as a consequence, he is not the one that I promised you. The one I promised you is going to be the one I produced through your dead wife, the sexually dead wife. Mm-hmm. So there again, the issue is, in this case, he's actually saying that Isaac is this called seed. Isaac's seed will be called. The promise was the seed of Abraham. It was to the seed. But when he says, in Isaac shall your seed be called, it means he's going to summon them out of Isaac and not Ishmael.
Okay.
So the idea of summons is still here.
Not that Isaac was called, but the seed was called from Isaac.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in 9:11, for not having yet been born nor having done anything good or bad, so that the purpose of God, according to selection or election, might remain not from works of I did go too far. Yeah. He calls, it was said to her that on the older will serve the younger, as it's written.
The call is up there.
I love, but not Ishmael or Esau. Are you talking about this?
Yeah, that's what we were.
Yeah, see, the issue in this text in chapter 9 is that before Ishmael or Isaac or anybody had done anything, he says they hadn't done anything good or bad, they hadn't been born. So that the purpose of the God, according to election, might remain, not from works, but from the one who calls. This is one of the big texts that everybody gets all upset about, because he's just basically saying, look, Esau didn't have anything to do with this by doing anything bad, and Isaac didn't have anything to do with this. I mean, Jacob didn't have anything to do with this by being good. It's because God said this was going to be. And that's the idea of calling. It's his call, if we could say it that way. Mm-hmm. And then in 24, he's talking about who is going to get to be involved in these benefits. He previously prepared for the glory. Us, whom he called, not out from the Jewish or Jews, but also from among the Gentiles. So again, this is God issuing a summons, but it's not limited to just Jews. It's going out to the Gentiles too. And that's a big part of Paul's theology, because whoever wrote the book of Hebrews, whether it was Paul or somebody else, the idea in Hebrews was that he was going to bring many sons to glory. And it even talks about the wealth of the glory upon vessels of mercy. And he says, whom he called. So, and I've been puzzling over that ever since I got up this morning. Over 8 billion people on the planet. And I know I'm nothing special, but I know I have a special privilege. Just an amazing privilege.
So the difference, what we started out with, the difference between this verb and the adjective is the fact that Paul was called.
It was called, and that makes him a called apostle.
Right. Okay.
And according to chapter 1, well, in verse 25, he also says, Hosea says, and this is justification for all he's arguing about, that it's prophesied. Hosea said, God said, people that have not been my people, I will call my people. And that's again in 26. So when we go back to chapter 1, oh, and by the way, a slick thing that you might not realize about this program is that these chapter numbers up here, you can click on one and it's instantly there. So, you know, if you know of a verse like, what was that one in verse 15? Chapter
15, verse 19.
You just click on it and all of a sudden you're in that chapter. And so that's really neat. All you have to do is slide up to the top, because it slides up to the end of the first of the chapter and it's always listed right there. But by the same token, at the end of the chapter, down here, it actually gives you the option of going back a chapter, going to the beginning of the chapter, or going to the next chapter. So you can choose. If I go to chapter 16, if I get to the end of chapter 16, then I get the option of either going back or going to 1 Corinthians. So that's just another one of those things I added in there. So when we get back here to the beginning, where he talks about being, I need to get out of that. Let's see if we can get over here. When he talks about being a servant of Jesus, he's basically just saying, like I've told you a lot of times about these preachers that say, if you disagree with me, you're disagreeing with God. In this case, he's right. Because he is a servant of Jesus Christ. But then, in this term, he's a called apostle. Well, that brings up the whole question, well, what's an apostle? There we go again.
But before you leave called,
okay.
I looked at, and I don't have good notes on this, but I looked at a lot of the translations, and I don't know if any of them say called apostle. They have called as an apostle, called to be an apostle. I think called to be, in my head, has a lot different than just called apostle. How do we sort out whether those prepositions, or whatever they are, should be there? I mean,
that infinitive to be,
or like as an apostle, or called an apostle, or, you know, it's...
In the King James, this infinitive is italicized, so they're telling you right there that they're sticking that in there. Yeah. Now, when it translates it as an apostle, that's I doubt that they're italicizing the as. So some of them are not as...
I think it is, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
In the New American, it's italicized.
Okay.
But it does, and is still there in regular print, called an apostle.
Yes. And this would technically be, instead of an apostle, it would be a called apostle.
Right.
So the idea here is the issue of being a called apostle, because everything hinges then on what is an apostle. And in the culture, in this If you get one of these pop up down here, just right click on it and say close this view. That's the easy way to get rid of that. Okay, when you get to this word apostle and you right click on it and you go say find it, you're going to only have it 3 times in the book of Romans. The first verse, chapter 11, verse 13, when he says, I speak to you Gentiles inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify my office. Well, that tells you what an apostle is, somebody with an office. And in this case, his office is being the one to carry the gospel to the Gentiles. That's his charge, that's his office. And the issue is that he is a representative of Jesus Christ as an apostle. And so we're asking, well, what is an apostle? Well, the root of the word is apa. Remember that word? Did I give you that word, out from within? No, that's egg. Apa. From. It's a combination of apostle. It comes from a verb that means to send forth, away from. Pa is away from. In other words, it does, in terms of your circle, the pa is not, it's away from the circle. So it would be from the outside of the circle, but putting more distance away. So in your little circle thing, you can just put a line from outside the circle away with an arrow drawn that way and put APO on there. That's the apostle. That's the apa. The word apostolos comes from apa and stello. Stello means to send. So this is somebody who's sent from somebody. And as they say it here, it's the person sent on a mission.
From and to.
Uh-huh.
From and to the Gentiles.
Yes, but see, in this case here, he is an apostle. This of the Gentiles. Let's see. That's probably a genitive. Let me see. It's a noun. Yeah, it's a genitive. The case thing there.
Mm-hmm.
Is the G. The genitive is the case for somebody who either owns it, it's his, like if you said the house of me, that of me would be genitive, and it would be my house. But if I was the builder, but I didn't own it, I just built it, it would be the house from me. And that's what they call the ablative, but they're spelled exactly alike. So you have to decide on the basis of context whether it's mine or whether I was the source of it. And it belongs maybe to somebody else, but I was the source of it. Now, having said all that, are we running out of time? Yeah, well, not quite. The issue here is that he's from Jesus. He's the called apostle, but he has been dedicated to the ownership of the Gentiles in terms of somebody representing Jesus for them. He is their apostle, as opposed to Peter being the apostle of the Jews. So, when we look at it that way, the issue of apostle fits exactly the concept of the secular Greek world in that day, because the word apostle in that day was somebody sent on an authoritative mission. An apostle in the first century could marry the person that sent him to somebody, and they would be bound by the marriage. They had that authority. So, if you're an apostle of somebody, you have their authority behind whatever your task is. And that just weighs this whole issue even heavier, because if he's a bondservant of Jesus, but he is coming to the Gentiles with the authority of Jesus behind him, like I said last week, if this opening statement in the book of Romans, he's saying, you ignore this at your eternal peril. This is not my words. This is God's words. And he sent me with his authority to write these things, so that's one of the arguments for inspiration of the scriptures, that there are no mistakes, because the sender is bound by the words of the sent, and therefore he's got to make sure they're right.
It reminds me, for some reason, of Abraham, the servant he sent to get a wife for
Yes.
Isaac.
Yes. He put him under a bond, in a sense, an obligation, an oath,
Right.
to bring his son a wife, but he said, if she won't come, then you're free from the oath.
Right.
But yeah,
It's the same.
It's exactly
The same
issue.
authority and the same duty and everything, just like Paul is claiming here.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that we need to be really clear on in our biblical concept of the words of God, because he's an apostle. It's locked in. When he says it, that's it. That's the way it is. But we have to understand and constantly keep in mind that it is not our opinion of his meaning. It's his meaning for his meaning, and that's what we're looking for. I didn't run from apostle to inspiration of the scriptures just on a whim. It's an absolute necessity built on the basis of this word. If he carries the authority of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, they cannot ignore what he says without putting themselves in disastrous peril. And that's what's going on. This is an easy soapbox to get on. Our culture is disintegrating rapidly because people have abandoned the apostleship of Paul. They've abandoned the word of God.
Now, you said the prefix
Apa?
apa.
Yeah.
The last part of that word, what was the other?
Stello, Stello.
Yeah.
That's what it comes from.
Right.
When it says from 649, that's going to take you to another. 649. Let's go here. Yes. If we go to G49, did it already do that?
Yeah, it did. As soon as you.
Okay, so here, the verb that is being translated is only one time in Romans, and that's right here. Where is it? 649.
Clicked on it, yeah.
No,
It's in 12.
It's 10:15. Yeah. In chapter 10, he's raising the issue of how shall they believe in him whom they've not heard, and how shall they hear without a preacher, and how shall they preach except somebody sends them. That's your word, Stella. But
It's to be sent.
yeah, to send away. Apa means from, and send is, see, it says it's from G4724, is that right? My eyes don't always. What was that number again?
G4724.
4724.
Could be wrong.
My mouse is double clicking sometimes, so it's jumping from.
Withdraw.
See, there's your Stello. That's sin. Send yourself away.
Away from. Okay.
Yeah. Send yourself away from every brother that doesn't walk according to the traditions that he's received from us.
Okay.
That's another one of those texts that people are simply ignoring these days. But see, in 2 Corinthians, where it's used again, the idea is avoiding, but it means to send yourself away from it. Get away from it. it has the idea, it's almost like it's a reflexive verb, it's not, but it's almost like that, because avoiding means that you're avoiding, but that basically means you've set up a standard that you're going to stay this far away from that. So you're sending yourself away. And this apostello means to send from. So Jesus, because he's not here, chose those men to be his authoritative representatives. And in the expression of the gospel, they could not err. They could err in their public application of it, like Peter did when he started acting like a Jew. When the people from James come up from Jerusalem, and he didn't want to be branded as one of those Gentile lovers. So instead of acting like he'd been acting among the Gentiles, he withdrew and started acting like a Jew. And he didn't. It was because he didn't want to have to put up with all of the flack he was going to get from them. That was a big mistake, but that wasn't in his doctrine, that was in his behavior. So in terms of teaching and writing, the apostles were underwritten by God's authoritative inerrancy. They had to be. They were his apostles. But in terms of their behavior, they didn't always live up to their theology. They wrote the right theology, they didn't live it sometimes. And James admitted that. He said we all stumble in the way. Okay.
So back to Romans 1, if you got just a second.
Sure.
It was apostle from Jesus, right?
I'm in Romans. I'm in Corinthians.
Yeah.
There we go. This will get us back to Romans. The word apostle. Okay. He is an apostle. He's a called apostle. This puts heavy weight on this because he was summoned for this to be this. But he was separated under the gospel of God, which he's defining here, this aphorizo, this separation thing. He's defining his arena of apostleship.
Separated unto the gospel is the follow-up on stello, right?
Well, it's not the same word. This is a different word than stello, but it does have the idea that he is an apostle, and that apostleship has been directed into this one area.
Right, okay. Right. Yeah, because just saying he's an apostle didn't mean nothing. He could be an apostle from anywhere.
Well, and he could be an apostle in a different area.
Right.
I mean, it could have been house sales. I'm an apostle for house sales.
Right.
Instead of the gospel.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
And it doesn't mean, just the word apostle don't mean where he came from by itself. It has nothing to do.
That's why he has to have it as all of these words as being tied together.
Right.
Are building this case. What he's doing is he's building this case saying, look, you dare not ignore what I'm going to tell you. You dare not. Infinity's too long to ignore the truth and pay the consequences.
And that's the whole point of verses 1 through 7 that we talked about. That he's building his platform and
he's laying the groundwork for his
credentials
for all of Romans from then on. Everything he says in Romans, properly understood as his meaning, is absolutely truth. Good. This is why we don't get very far in our studies. But I'm almost defensive about going so slowly in our studies, but I can't be defensive about that. If we don't understand what we're being told, we are not helped at all. And if we have to slow down and make sure people get it, then that's what we have to do. Slow down and make sure people get it.
agreed.
All right, well, let's have a word of prayer then, and we'll pick up here next week. Father, we're grateful to you, the infinite God, who stooped as low as to communicate with us in our language and words so that we might know your truth. and enter into the promise of life that you've promised to those who believe what you say. And we pray that as we go on about our business this morning, that you'll guide Tim in his Sunday school lesson and guidance over it, and for the rest of us as we go into the worship hour, that we might be found doing the things that please you. And so we commit ourselves to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Go.